Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine has issued a statement about the state of fulfillment of Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements have provided for the clear-cut schedule of the implementation of the Minsk Memorandum, including the bilateral ceasefire and withdrawal of heavy arms and return to the delineation borderline. The Russian side, however, have recalled their signature from this document. Today, Ukraine, as usually, again has addressed the Russian Federation with a proposal to sign the schedule of the implementation of Minsk agreements according to the version of the 13th of November and to provide for the ceasefire from the 19th of January. The President of Russian Federation continues to corroborate his commitment to the Minsk agreement.
Could you give us more details about the situation in Donetsk airport? Are there any losses during the last 24 hours and also wounded? There are wounded. As to those who are killed, that is the data for the whole zone of ATO. I cannot tell you exactly where, but I can tell you that 99 times the Ukrainian troops were shelled at during the last 24 hours. 47 settlements were shelled at. You were talking about the losses among peaceful population in Gorlivka. You did not mention Gorlivka. Were there any losses in Gorlivka? One second. As to Gorlivka, we don't have any detailed information. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you now. Yesterday, the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation stated that according to the Minsk agreement, the territory of Donetsk airport is to be freed by Ukrainian military. Is it another speculation of Russians? According to Minsk agreement, according to the protocol of the 5th of September, memorandum of the 15th of September, they don't say anything about Donetsk airport. The first item was ceasing fire by both sides. Ukrainian military are executing it, but there are provocative shellings and our servicemen are forced to shell back, to fire back. Wall Street Journal, to continue the question, were there any coordinates in these Minsk agreements? This separation line, does it go along the airport? Where is this separation line? The separation line was the one when these agreements were signed. The Donetsk airport was under the control of Ukrainian military, and the condition, and there was no requirement that they have to leave this airport. We understand why Russian side insists on us surrendering the airport. That's not just strategic object. That is one of the platforms from which the terrorists can start their assault. But I believe item 3 was after the heavy weaponry is withdrawn 15 kilometers away. That means that they have to take their heavy weaponry 15 kilometers away from Donetsk airport, and that is outside of the center of Donetsk, and they do not want to leave the center of the city without their weapons, and that is why they insist on us surrendering the airport, and we do not surrender. Yesterday in DNR headquarters, they informed that the major of intelligence of the armed forces of Ukraine was imprisoned yesterday, and they said that they keep him in the camp for military prisoners of war in Donetsk. What do you know about this camp? As to the getting our servicemen imprisoned, we have no information about that. As to the place where Ukrainian citizens are maintained, there's no one camp. There are several places where our civilians and military are kept, and they demand the ransom for them and some other things. As to the statements of the DNR about victories, they as far as I remember, yesterday they informed about 4 downed military aircrafts, Ukrainian, and about many other of their victories, but it was all yesterday what they were stating about that. Their statements do not correspond to the reality, and please pay attention to that. But if you have any doubts, please ask for clarification. Then in Donetsk airport, does Ukrainian army try to get the positions that were lost during the regime of the silence, or does that mean that Ukrainian army starts offense? The Ukrainian army has the object where they had to be, the Donetsk airport, which is just before the line of separation. That is where Ukrainians are to be. The militants are not observing the Donetsk agreements in relation to Donetsk airport. We understand why they are doing it. What was happening in the last days, that was just returning the status quo. Our military are again fully controlling this object. Now they can take personnel and ammunition there. That is not a simple task because the shellings continue from the side of the militants. We managed to clean some routes to bring everything needed for our people, for our defendants in the airport. 2 more questions. Reuters agency. Once you mentioned about aviation. Was aviation working yesterday? And what's the situation in Minsk? Yesterday, Ukrainian military aviation was not working. They were ready to evacuate heavily wounded people. We informed about that yesterday morning, and we're doing it because the heavily wounded servicemen are to be quickly delivered to the hospitals. The military aviation was not used. The situation in Minsk, it's still very tense. For several days already, there there's warfare going on there. We cannot say that it's under our control because the situation changes all the time, but most part of this settlement is under the control of our Ukrainians. The next question will be in English. I just wanted to ask about the line of demarcation. As far as I remember, in Minsk agreement, there's nothing about such line. Where is that line mentioned? Thank you so much for this question. That's a great question. In Minsk agreement, I believe in the protocol there was a sentence that as of the moment of signing the protocol, the forces which are occupying certain positions, which are holding certain positions, they stay at these positions, and that is the line of demarcation. There were no coordinates mentioned in the memorandum of protocol to control this line, and that is the line here. And there was the international working group set up, contact group, that included the representatives of OSCE, representatives of Russian Federation, and representatives of Armed Forces of Ukraine. And they have these coordinates, and they are responsible for having this demarcation line every morning, at least they report on that. To clarify, as to Russian aviation, if Russia uses the aviation, what will be the reaction of Ukrainian military? What measures will be taken not to allow the shellings of the troops from the air in case the Ukrainian national airspace is violated in order to attack our peaceful population? The targets will be eliminated. Any questions to Colonel? No more questions. Thank you. I would like to remind you again that the press briefing about the humanitarian assistance